Well, welcome to our final session of day 2 at the ICC Digital Trade Conference. My name is Chris Southworth. I'm Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce here in the UK. For this final session, we're going to be looking at digital identification as a building block for future trade. That's extremely relevant to all the sessions that have come up actually over the last couple of days, particularly around issues like trust, reducing crime and fraud, increasing security, and reducing the burden and complexity of verifications and anti-money laundering and KYC processes. So this is an extremely relevant session, and in a way quite timely. Is coming at the end of the conference, or at least at the end of day 2. So could I ask all the speakers to come on camera, and while we do that, I will introduce you to Rick Holyomes, who is the Legal Entity Identification Lead at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport here in the UK. For overseas, that's effectively our Department for Digital in the context of trade. And Rick's team is really doing a lot of the thought leadership around policy barriers. What are they? How do we remove them? And the context of this conversation is super relevant. So he and I and the team have been talking for quite some time about this session, and the questions that Rick is asking are exactly the same questions that we're all asking too. So this is perfect timing and a great example of how we can work well with our governments. So Rick, could I hand over to you and I'll come off screen.
Chris, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, both audience and panel members and ICC colleagues. Welcome to this session. As Chris alluded, we are going to consider digital identities during this session. But we are going to focus on a particular form, the legal entity identifier. I have been working in the digital trade team for the last 18 months or so now, looking very much about how we digitize what we trade rather than how we trade. And then in doing so, I'm looking to establish us, DCMS and the UK, as thought leaders in this space. As part of my work, I have looked at legal entity identifiers, LEIs, and can see a range of potential benefits to those who engage in trade. However, very much like a stick of rock, if you cut me in half, written all the way through is technology and service neutral. And for me, that is why I've worked with Chris to convene this, because we as government can see no evidence of a market failure. Indeed, it is always our preference that it is for the market, the users of digital identity, to make a free choice based on merit, benefits, and particular use circumstances. And it's these we are going to explore today. To assist us in that, we are joined by the 3 panel members, all of whose individual and collective expertise is far greater than my own. They are Clare Rowley, Head of Business Operations at the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, Richard Lewis from the Future Payments team at the Bank of England, and Simon Wood, Group CEO at Ubisecure. I'll invite each to set out their thoughts in a short intervention that will hopefully provide you with some background and detail to aid our discussion. Claire will be very much focusing on background and governance. Richard will focus on the macroeconomic benefits, and Simon will provide valuable insight and practical experience in their application. As Chris alluded to, the overall aim of today's discussion is to identify 2 or 3 actions or smart objectives that can then be collated into ICC's action plan. However, we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves in setting that as a parameter. We need to ask ourselves as well, should we take action in this space or not? It could be research on further benefits. It could be an awareness action plan. None of these are set in stone, and it will be certainly for this session, you that help shape and identify what they would be. As part of this, and to help drive the discussion, please do drop comments and questions in the chat facility. Myself and ICC colleagues are looking at these, and we will feed them into the discussion. Finally, before I invite Claire to speak, and in order to set the ball rolling, I'd like to start off with a few points and questions of my own. The ownership of a verifiable digital identity is key to trading now, let alone in the future. The use of legal entity identifiers has 100% penetration where it is mandated, but once you drift outside of where that mandate sits, their usage is very, very low. So is this a problem we should look to fix? And why should we look to fix it? And indeed, how? Recent agreements, such as the UK-Singapore Digital Economy Agreement, drive forward cooperation and piloting ways of digitising how we trade. Do LEIs have a role in that activity of future pilots and cooperation? I also see in the recently published ICC WTO Digital Standards Toolkit, LEIs is indicated as one of 5 digital identities recommended. What is it about their use that is preferable over the other 4 options? What are those extra benefits? And do we know enough to pick LEIs over other digital identities? Should we pick a winner? So I will stop there at that point. And Claire, may I invite you to give us your intervention, please? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you to Chris for the invitation to speak today, and also to Rick for the nice introduction. I'd like to set the scene a bit by giving the background information. What is this legal entity identifier, and more broadly, the global LEI system that it sits in? The legal entity identifier is a lifelong code that is owned by the respective legal entity. It is not owned in a proprietary identification system by a third party. It is directly attributed to and owned by the legal entity. It is based on a global international ISO standard, and it points to reference data that is freely available. What I'd like to do is just very briefly show you an LEI so you get a feeling for what exactly is that reference data, and also the open nature of the reference data. You'll see here the foundation, the Global LEI Foundation website. We make available all of those identifiers, the LEIs, as well as the reference data via a simple website search. And then for more technical users, we have a full file service, a full file download service, as well as an application programming interface and API. But here I just show you our simple website search. I'll just look for a company that's a bit more in the non-financial sector, that being Nestle. And you get a feel here for the amount of information and the very important fundamental information about a legal entity that comes with that LEI. You'll see here you have the primary legal name of the entity. Given it was in a different character set, you would also get a transliteration to Latin characters. You get some information as to where that entity is registered. Here it is the headquarters of Nestle, which is registered in Switzerland, and importantly, that local identifier. The LEI serves as the global passport, but we know a global passport is only meaningful if it also serves to link to regional, national, sectoral identification schemes. Moving on down here, you get some standard information on the type of entity it is according to the jurisdiction. Again, focusing on linkages, you have here what are called ISINs. These are representations of securities or other financial instruments that are issued by this particular entity. You see here we have in total approximately 20 that are associated with Nestle. And then we have information on the addresses associated from either a legal or headquarters perspective. And I'd like to spend just a moment here to talk about the registration details, as this is specific to the global legal entity identifier system, but also very important, for example, supplier due diligence. So you know, when was this particular entity registered in the system? And very importantly, when was that information last validated and updated, which of course for due diligence is a very important piece of information to know. You know when it is scheduled for its next validation, that being February of 2023. And you know how was that corroborated. So corroboration, we mean, is that reference data validated against a third-party source? In this case, you see it was fully corroborated, and this here is a code to that source being, again, the business registry, along with the identifier for the entity in that source. The last thing I highlight here is the information on relationships. So there is a reporting of parent information based on an accounting consolidation. And here you'll just see the listing of the children that are associated with the headquarters. You have a link to the particular entity. So for example, if you wanted to click here, you would then get into information on the associated subsidiaries in other countries. So I like to highlight that just so users get a feel of the open public data, the accessibility, and very importantly, that mapping aspect. Very quickly, the governance structure, we as the foundation are responsible for the operations of the system. We have, for example, a data quality program that is applied every day to the reference data. We work with 38 organizations around the world that are referred to as LEI issuers. They have the practical link to the legal entity as well as the knowledge of validation verification. And of course, we have Rapid LEI also in the panel as one of our LEI issuers. The entire system is overseen by an organization called the Regulatory Oversight Committee. It is made up of over 65 regulators coming from around the world that set the policy and ensure the evolution of the system to meet public and private sector needs. To close out the introduction, I will briefly address, Rick, your points regarding the other identifiers mentioned in that ICC WTO Digital Standards Toolkit. I already mentioned mapping. So the importance of having a global identity that can link then to national, regional, sectoral identifiers. And those other identifiers mentioned in the report are examples. For example, the BIC code. Well, that is used for routing payments. We already have a partnership with SWIFT to map the BIC code where available to the LEI. For those that may not be aware, a legal entity can have more than one BIC code, as it can also be assigned to branches, trading desks, etc. So you need that BIC code mapped to the LEI to enable also the precision of who exactly is the legal entity tied to the BIC code. Secondarily, the global location number, or GLN, it is used for identifying locations such as manufacturing plants, logistics, etc. Well, very similarly, that GLN could be mapped to the LEI so that a user has the precision of knowing, well, who is the legal entity it is engaging with that reference point. We move to the trader identification number. I would suggest that is a data point that is exchanged between customs organizations. There's not really a way to know, is it globally unique? What is the data quality as it is managed privately between each of the mutual recognition arrangements? But similarly, if it were mapped to the LEI, there would then be an ability to answer the question, is it unique, quality questions, etc. And lastly, I touch on DIDs because decentralized identifiers, it's a very exciting emerging area of identity management. So DIDs are created for the unambiguous identification of virtual objects in computer-to-computer communications. They mean nothing to human beings, and you could even say they don't mean anything even to computers unless you know the particular method that is applied to that DID. Well, of course, we have DIDs that are controlled by legal entities, and a legal entity could be associated with hundreds, maybe even someday thousands of DIDs. So a huge resource to industry would be, again, coming back to that theme of mapping, linking DIDs that are associated with entities to the legal entity. So you would have the precision of knowing whatever this virtual object is, how is it associated with the legal entity? So a summary, the important characteristics of the LEI, it is a unique global identifier, an open identification system. It is endorsed and overseen by regulatory authorities around the world, and it is monitored regularly by a transparent data quality program. I stop there, Rick. My apologies. I could speak probably too long on this topic, but I give you back the word.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire, for that first intervention, providing a bit of background, etc. A quick question, if I may. When you flashed up the example, you had Nestle, which of course as a company size sits at one end of the spectrum. Often we think about small and medium enterprises, etc., where cost might start becoming a more sensitive issue compared to Nestle. You know, I mean, is there, you know, it sounds like you've got a good quality product there. What's the bottom line? Is it a high cost, or how does the cost pan out?
The way the system is funded, it comes from, you could say, the lowest level. So there was a desire by the regulators when setting up the global system to prevent any market lock-in or any influence from one particular jurisdiction. So indeed, it is the legal entity that will make a payment for the LEI services of validation, verification, and the identity. Today, it would be, you could say, probably somewhere between 60-70 euro for the obtaining of an LEI. And of course, that depends the jurisdiction and the organization you are engaging. What we are doing at the GLEIF is looking for ways to expand and make that LEI more accessible to small businesses, for example. One such way would be working with business registers or chambers of commerces that attribute the local identity to also attribute that global identity at the same time. We already have several business registers that participate in our system as LEI issuers. And another option would be to work with financial institutions, where we see financial institutions, they're already providing small businesses financial services. They conduct customer due diligence to open those accounts. And the validation verification occurring in the global LEI system is largely similar to the identification procedures conducted by financial institutions. So we've introduced an operating model called Validation Agent to make that LEI more easily accessible to the financial institutions to provide to their clients at a lower cost option.
Claire, thank you very much. It does sound as though with every business arguably having a bank account, there might be fertile ground there, that the LEI becomes very much an onboarding and a process and a characteristic of just having a bank account. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So now what I'm going to do is move over to Richard from the Bank of England. Your intervention, please. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rick. So the Bank of England has taken a keen interest in the LEI as a building block for innovation and enhancing efficiency, competition and productivity in the economy. So I'd just like to spend a few minutes sort of unpacking what that means, as well as touching on a little bit about what we're doing to promote uptake of the LEI in the UK and internationally. So I think at its heart, the benefit provided by use of the LEI is actually quite simple. It provides a single, unambiguous way of identifying legal entities globally in a way that isn't possible using names and addresses. So to take a very simple example, whereas it would be possible for a system to confuse the Bank of England, the UK central bank, with Bank of England based in Arkansas in the United States, if we use their LEIs, we can quickly and reliably establish that these are two completely unrelated entities. And importantly, this can also enable automated linking of information on legal entities held in separate databases. But why do we care about this? Put simply, it's because we can enable businesses, governments, regulators, so anyone with an interest to source, move and analyze data. So the LEI has all the right ingredients to deliver a wide range of benefits for end users, and thereby delivering a wider range of economic benefits. Beyond the financial sector, LEIs have the potential to be a transformative building block for realizing opportunities of digitization in the real economy. So I'm going to touch on a few examples now. I think and I'll divide these roughly along the lines of businesses as users of data, sort of governments and regulators, and then, of course, the benefits for the businesses that themselves register for LEIs. So in terms of benefits to businesses as users of data, there's a huge range of efficiencies that could come from using LEI data. Now, of course, my background's in banking and payments, where a range of opportunities have been identified. So these include operational efficiencies in payments and reconciliation processes, better know your customer and financial crime checks, and improved due diligence and risk management processes. But outside of finance, all but the simplest of business transactions involve a chain of institutions. And across any chain, there are going to be many unique ways of identifying a business. So because of that, there will have to be manual checks and reconciliation processes involved every step of the way. I'm sure that delegates of this conference will be able to name specific examples better than me, but obvious examples that occur would include, international compliance, customs checks, that sort of thing. So using the LEI to automate identification of entities and link data sets can help drive greater efficiency and help businesses to focus efforts and resources on actual value-added activity. So LEIs can also support transparency for investors, suppliers, creditors. and they can be used to augment the information that's provided on business as part of due diligence. So this helps market participants to retrieve information on who they're doing business with and to conduct their own data-driven analysis and deepen insight into the markets they operate in. So that's sort of touching briefly on businesses. For governments and regulators, I think there are a range of benefits to being able to link data sets using the LEI. And this can help governments to make better decisions based on a better understanding of complex data. So, for example, this could enable taking a more granular view, looking at sectoral information across an economy to better understand live trends. So to take another example from banking and payments, here at the Bank of England, we're planning to introduce the LEI within our CHAPS payment system. And that's going to enable us to better understand trends and make better decisions based on a fuller identification of systemic risks. Widespread use of the LEI could also enable more effective policy decisions by public authorities, given that better data on economic activity will be available to statistical authorities and policymakers. And in the context of the UK's digital strategy, LEIs could help improve identification and access to public services and enable government to cross-reference information from other data sources, including from overseas, and to share these more effectively across government departments. And finally, in terms of what government could do for end users, it can help improve user experience and alleviate administrative burden, for example, by introducing an only tell us once principle in reporting requirements. So number of benefits there for sort of government and regulators. So finally, turning to benefits to entities themselves. Assuming that they can't benefit from any of the benefits I've kind of talked about already, there's obviously the opportunity to benefit from improved services. So which stem from unambiguous identification of exactly who they are. So going back to the efficiencies I mentioned earlier for banks, that ought to result in better, faster and cheaper services for their clients. But in addition, to take another specific case study, for smaller businesses and SMEs, the bank has done work showing the role that the LEI could play in enabling easier access to finance. So for example, a unique identifier such as the LEI could be linked to a portable credit file into which businesses could pull their data and shop around for more diverse and competitive finance options. The potential reward here is large. So if successfully implemented, this could really help to close the funding gap for SMEs, which has recently been estimated at £56 billion in the UK. So of course, it's only a flavour of some of the benefits that come with widespread LEI use and uptake, but hopefully it illustrates a wide range of efficiency and productivity gains that could be realised. So I just wanted to finish by touching on what the Bank of England is doing to promote the uptake of the LEI and the types of actions that others could start to consider. So crucially, every benefit that stems from use of the LEI depends on network effects arising from widespread adoption. So we've clearly observed this in the financial sector across multiple jurisdictions. But at the same time, the LEI is a public good, which means that the full benefits of adopting it may not accrue directly to the businesses that actually have to go through the admin steps and taking on the cost of acquiring an LEI. And that means that we may not necessarily be able to rely on individual businesses to acquire LEIs without there being some incentivization. So this means there's a very important role for bodies that can play a convening role with industry. So the Bank of England has taken some steps in this regard, although the areas obviously that we can influence are largely within the financial sector, where uptake is already reasonably high. However, we're going further where we can, and beyond championing the LEI with public and private sector, we're looking at steps we can take to promote uptake. Chief among these is requiring the use of LEIs for payments in the CHAPS payment system. So from summer 2024, the bank will mandate the use of LEIs for CHAPS payments where the payment involves a transfer of funds between financial institutions, and we're going to widen this requirement over time. So in terms of then how we can broaden this and maybe think about it in the context of this session, I would support a two-pronged strategy. So on the one hand, raising awareness to the LEI and working with businesses to illustrate use cases that demonstrate the pain points that the LEI can alleviate is really key. But at the same time, as a convener, bodies such as the ICC can include obtaining and using LEIs and best practice guidance and standards as an incentive for their members and those they do business with. So just a sort of 2 pence there. But with those thoughts, I'll hand back over to you, Rick. Thanks.
Richard, thank you. I think we may have identified why we would want to certainly universalise the use of LEIs in the UK, because that funding gap for SMEs is quite significant, £56 billion. It's interesting that you set out towards the end of your intervention actions that the Bank of England is taking to encourage adoption. Of course, right at the severe end of that driving adoption is mandating. And there are two similar questions from the floor I think we'll cover now. Why do you think it's not been, the banks aren't mandated to ensure their business customers have an LEI? The banks must drive one up in order as part of onboarding, or indeed the other way around. Why has it not been mandated for business owners to have one in order to start engaging with banks and the finance sector, and indeed with wider economy?
And these are excellent questions that sort of get to the very heart of the challenge as to why banks may not have mandated it for their business customers. I think there is always a tricky balance to strike, and this is something that we've experienced when it's come to mandating in payment systems. So I think you need to ensure that a requirement is proportionate and it is not in and of itself going to cause issues in the system when you bring it in. So there's a certain level of sophistication. I think this is where Claire's point about if you can link it to a process that is happening anyway, and an LEI then emerges as a result of that, I think that's a very useful way to approach the problem. And I think the other comment to make is that other jurisdictions maybe have taken steps further than the UK have. So certainly in India, for example, their requirement on businesses to use it in payments is considerably more stringent than we're going to go. So it is possible. I think it's a case of balancing the benefits there against the administrative burden and raising awareness and not moving too quickly for the market.
Richard, thank you very much. As somebody who always keeps the better regulation guidebook to hand, yes, I can see the proportionate response, etc., before mandating. Thank you very much indeed. I now turn to our third panelist, Simon. Simon, thank you very much for your patience with this. I believe you're going to show us some real-world examples of usage outside of the particular sector where they're mandated. So very much over to you now, Simon. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. So yeah, absolutely. First of all, maybe a quick introduction. I'm sure you've all heard of the Bank of England, and attending this talk, you've probably looked at the GLEIF as well. You may never have heard of UbiSecure before. We are one of the 38 LEI issuers that Claire mentioned in her starting intervention. We were accredited for that in 2018. We are ourselves a small SME, so we understand how SMEs work and some of the challenges that are faced. But from being accredited in 2018, we are now the leading LEI issuer, and as of last month, we issued 25% of the global LEIs that existed in March, or that were newly created in March. So we are very familiar with that LEI creation and generation process. I think it's important that we look at why the LEIs can deliver value to organisations far beyond regulations. I think that's an important part for us to start to move on to consider now. Claire touched on some of the underlying aspects of the LEI that makes it valuable to do that. From our point of view, UbiSecure is a digital identity specialist. We recognise the value of highly assured identity. The LEI represents a highly assured organisation identity. You saw from the example that Claire gave, there was a fully corroborated example there. That means all of the data in that LEI has been validated at a business registry or at a collection of sources that are independently verified, or the master of the data. So we know that that's reliable data. We've discussed that it's globally unique, And importantly, we've discussed that it's open data access. Beyond having that identifier, you can understand the makeup and the various attributes that sit behind that. That's fundamentally important to delivering value from any digital identity in the general sense. So I've mentioned this as an example of organization identity. Now, when we tend to think about identity, we tend to think about individuals. Whenever we talk about identifying, we go immediately to human, passport identity, driver's license identity. And as individuals, we're quite familiar with handling our own identity. And the value of that identity is that it enables transactions, it enables automation of transactions as well. Whenever we interact, we are making objective or subjective calculations on the identity, on who we're dealing with. I'll just ask those people who are listening to this panel session, think about the last transaction you undertook. I'm gonna be fairly confident that it wasn't with another individual, it was with an organization. Maybe it was an order on Amazon, maybe it was your Tesco shopping, maybe it was a supplier for your business. That transaction would have been with an organization. That organization potentially asked you to go through a fairly strong identification process, log on, multi-factor, whatever it might have been. How did you identify the organization? It will be purely subjective. And that purely subjective identification makes it very hard to automate those transactions. And automation brings efficiency, brings saving. That's where the value of identity starts to play in this. Organization identity is as critical as individual identity as we look at bringing benefits to users of identities. And of course, we are all individually and as organizations, users of identity. So having understood that, looking at LEIs and how that can help us to bring that value, I think there are two classes from my point of view on that. First of all, we've got the LEI as a standalone identifier itself. Both Clare and Richard touched on the value to financial institutions. There is a great study on the GLEIF website by McKinsey about the value of savings that can be made by using LEI in financial organizations. And they're giving a value of around about $4 billion a year, saving through having a consistent identifier that can be used. We see SWIFT, the latest iteration of the standards there, the ISO standard, have incorporated LEI as a payment mechanism. You heard some of that from Richard as well. But then there are smaller use cases on that as well. For example, one of the organizations that we work with provide a beneficial ownership service. And as part of that, they use the LEI to identify the organization. Again, they are a small SME delivering that service to other SMEs who need to prove that the ownership structure and how the organization is, who has the ultimate beneficial ownership for the organization. An important service with the AML regulations we see tightening all the time. It's critical to understand that the LEI is a fantastic enabler in that service. Both Clare touched on the VA model, so the validation agent model. And I suspect this is something that people are wondering as well, and Richard touched on this. Why aren't banks using the data that they have to help with the issuance process of that? We see that starting. The GLEIF put together the VA model so that that could happen, and we already are working with a number of banks to enable their existing KYC data pools to deliver those LEIs as standalone identifiers to help them internally, but also delivers a benefit to the organization that is referenced by that LEI. So those are the kind of standalone identifier side. I guess within that, we should probably also briefly touch on digital signatures, digital certificates. We're seeing a lot of work now from global CAs and also national CAs about the incorporation of LEI information as the organization identity within digital certificates. Not so much for website identification, but certainly for email signing, document signing, bringing in that LEI-based information for that. It also gets around some of the classical challenges you get with certificates in that the information is locked at the time of signing. With LEI, you lock the legal entity who's signing it, but you allow real-time access of legal entity information, which is a fantastic change from what has traditionally happened. If we look at the second category of value from LEIs, and this is where it really starts to drive a difference within business returns, and that's using the LEI as an embedded enabler. Now, today, we very much see they're driven by financial regulation, the use cases that we have today. As we look forwards, and as we're starting to deliver now, there are a number of use cases where using the LEI vanishes, it becomes a tool or an item within a much higher value business transaction. Organizations no longer think about acquiring an LEI. They think about undertaking, delivering a use case, which just happens to be enabled by the issuance of an LEI. One of the important aspects of issuance of an LEI is the fact that we have to validate that the person requesting it has the authority to request that LEI for the organization. And that builds what we call a trust anchor. So as an issuer of LEIs, we build trust anchors that connect an individual with an organization who has authority with that organization identity. If we have both of those as highly assured items, then we can start to deliver governance services, delegation services based on that highly assured link, both from the individual and the organization identity. We are looking right now at rolling out broader based on the LEI, but those use cases are well understood and well quantified. We've been delivering to customers for the last 15 years, delivering value from that. The LEI now allows us to take global. So a couple of quick examples of actual value that can be delivered here. We have a customer who delivered that delegation capability. They reduced the onboarding time of other business customers by 95% by understanding the organization identity. That saving can be delivered by LEIs for those organizations. So a 95% onboarding reduction time is one of the benefits that they had. Same company had a saving of $1 million a year through using that consistent organization identity. So these are big savings. Now, these are larger organizations, they're enterprise size rather than SME size. But still, if we scale those down to 10% of those savings, that's still a fantastic savings that any SME would be, fantastically happy to receive as part of their operations. We can go further than that. As we scale up, it was mentioned that some of this is maybe not a direct enabler for the small business itself, but within the ecosystem that they operate. Fantastic example from the Finnish tax authority. Back in 2008, they started using organization identity. This is pre-LEI. They started using organization identity to allow submission of tax returns. That generated them a 99-fold reduction in the cost of processing tax returns by having that organization identity empowering delegation through that submission process. The challenge with that system is it was locked within Finland because it used the national system. It couldn't be used outside of Finland. Transitioning that to LEI gives the ability to take that capability, that saving, and take that global to all organizations, all regions, and deliver that capability. That's the value that we get from LEI, and that's how SMEs, both from the using it and being benefited, can generate that kind of value saving for their organizations.
Simon, thank you very much. In the same way that Richard pointed to automation and a lot of savings around that, very much the case with you. And, these embedded enabler concept rather than the issuance itself. I think as well, we've got another question from the floor, and I think, Simon, if I may, I'm going to start with you on this one. Is that we spoke about role for banks, role for regulators, role for almost like the government stuff grouping, but over in the private sector, is there a role in some way where multinational companies, in the way that's like Nestle in Clare's example, is there a role, do you think, for them to start championing their use and advocating their use more than they do at the moment? And is there space to do that?
So one, absolutely. Today, so those efficiencies, those savings, those efficiencies that I've just spoken about, they can be realized through organizations automating their processes and dealing with their business networks in an automated fashion. Again, this is not a new principle, not a new proposition in terms of that automation, but having the LEI underpin the identity for the organizations through that automation, but also the ability to use the trust anchors, and we may stray onto VLEI at some point in this conversation, but using the LEI to underpin that trust anchor allows an enhancement of that saving. So you can then automate that delegation, automate the rights that people can have across those networks, and that's where those savings come from. So yes, private companies, multinational companies, even national companies, taking the ecosystem that they operate in, requiring those companies that they do business with to have an LEI, or even providing it as part of their onboarding, as part of their system as a organization. Of course, they can't issue it, but they can work with an issuer, or they can just include that into their sign-up system. Having that capability and having that will bring absolute benefits to the organizations that are running that ecosystem for their benefit, but also more broadly as well, as that LEI becomes then embeddable in other use cases for the organizations they're partnering with in some of the other scenarios that exist. Absolutely.
And Rick, may I provide also one example there? Thank you. So to lead on from where Simon brought, I'd like to just highlight an example of a treasury transformation initiative. A business partner came to us. This is a private firm, and they have an inflection point in their organization, an opportunity to change, and that is a treasury transformation project. So this particular business partner has been long aware of the LEI, looking to use it, and this is the opportunity to start and to think more broadly. So what they have done is they are putting the LEI as a data point for the suppliers. So collecting that information, now connecting to the open public data. So to know, for example, when address changes, name changes, some of those key characteristics on data corroboration, which could alert them something's going on with your supplier in a supplier network. And maybe it's a supplier they don't have very frequent interactions, et cetera. And then on the other side, in their request to financial services, they are requesting that financial institutions accept the LEI as a data point. Additionally, that the financial institution do account verification for payments based on the LEI. What they've told us so far is it's a long road for education. So education internally, people are saying, well, what is this LEI, et cetera, making an education on the benefits, and then also with the financial institutions. So as Richard described, the LEI is used, but often for a lot of transaction reporting. So maybe it's that other people in the financial institution are aware, et cetera, but it is a demonstration that when the client, so the organizations that are engaging the financial institutions for account services is asking for the LEI, that might be also something that causes the financial institutions to say, hey, this is interesting. This is something that now my clients are asking for, but really a great example of how if there is a project that enables change or transformation, that's a great time to look and to say, okay, if we're doing the changes anyways, let's leverage this identifier and bring in the benefits.
Claire, thank you very much. I think I'm going to pause very slightly there because I've got half an eye on the time and we do have to drive up some actions. I think for me, from the presentations, what we've spoken about, there are lots of very good reasons why we should point to LEI as one of the 5. You know, I mean, Claire, you spoke about the open source. Simon, you've spoken a lot about their practical application already and how they're already demonstrating lots of benefits. I'm very much attracted to that amazing figure that Richard provided for SMEs, and it opens up a wealth of funding for them, and indeed then hoping that a number of those SMEs will drive on and become engaged in trade. So I think we don't need to do any more research on why that's the case. The benefits are writ large. So as I sort of remembering what I said in my introduction about we're not looking at a market failure, given this discussion and then arguably some of the questions are coming up, not least of all the last one, which was where do I find a list of issuers? It's almost as though we're facing a marketing failure rather than a market failure. So that, you know, I mean, it seems as though that's what we are driving at now, is actually there's a way that we should think about an action around championing and pointing towards these benefits, maybe singing about them a little louder. So maybe what I am going to do, Richard, I'm going to kick off with you. What do you think that the single step, if I was to grant you a single wish, and that would be an action that would promulgate and prophesize the use of LEIs and their benefits, what do you think that should be?
I really think if we're trying to sell it, I think it's the awareness piece, and I think talk about it in as many places as possible. I think, you know, we were able to make a reasonably large splash with the LEI. We issued a report called the Future of Finance Report and a few years ago now, back in 2019. And we included references in the speech by the Governor, Mansion House, and that did help to drive awareness in the UK. But I think it's, as Clare has kind of touched on, don't overestimate levels of education and awareness. And I think it's banging the drum to the extent that it can be included in sort of strategic priorities, anything ICC is saying publicly. I think just continuing to drive that message as much as possible, really.
Richard, thank you. Claire, I'm going to turn to you. Similar question. You have one wish. What's the big action we should take to raise awareness?
I would suggest more use cases, pilot projects. We've mentioned already this validation agent operating model engagement we have with financial institutions. I would suggest for the corporates on the line, if there's a desire to have your financial institution, leveraging the LEI, for example, confirmation of payee, very critical fraud prevention type of activities. This is where we're very interested to have partnerships. And another area that is very interesting, and we have some increasing outreach, is sustainable supply chain relationships. So knowing, for example, using that LEI to recognize suppliers, then having additional information just thanks to the LEI and the suppliers' subsidiaries, et cetera, bringing transparency to supply chain networks.
Claire, thank you very much. Simon.
So one wish, if it could be anything for the benefit of the UK, which I know is at one level out of scope for what we're talking about here in terms of actions. But if we could have Companies House mandated to just issue LEIs for all businesses, that would bootstrap the UK and give the critical mass that we need. However, I think that's a big wish, and maybe we should set our sights more short term and more actionable right now. I very much echo the awareness, the marketing side. I think in terms of real near-term actions that we could wish for, I mean, the ICC is a well-respected organisation, so let's have the ICC start pushing directly the benefits of LEIs to all the members, maybe even offering them an easy channel to go through issuance for that. Whoever issues that, just an easy connection from the ICC to all of their members to help the members get those. If the ICC included that LEI as part of membership, we'd immediately start driving towards critical mass. So it's about bringing that critical mass to the ecosystem. We've spoken a lot about use cases, we've spoken a lot about what we can do, what we are doing right now. There's it's a double-headed situation. We need a critical mass of LEIs to have all of the innovation that we have within the UK and globally, delivering solutions that are benefited by LEIs. But we need those solutions to get the critical mass of LEI. So it is a chicken and an egg situation there. We need that bootstrapping mechanism to take place. It's unlikely to take place at the national level in the short term. So let's look within the more localized, more controllable domains. So for example, the ICC, but there are many other domains as well, having those push the benefit, push the value, and deliver that out and start bringing those membership, those ecosystems up the line. Then we will see the use cases actually accelerate and start delivering really high value for all the members, all the SMEs, all of the organizations that are out there.
Simon, thank you very much. I'm looking at the chat window as well as the time. I can see that captured in the chat window are some questions that appear to be of quite a technical nature. If ICC colleagues can capture those, because one is particularly asking questions around, I'm trying to understand the question myself, global proxy identifiers. Why would we want to use a proxy identifier rather than an authoritative identifier? But that might be a question we can, for ICC to set aside and answer as part of their activities. But Simon, very much your final intervention there echoes with a question that's in the chat window at the moment. Is there a role for ICC to help catalyze pilots to test and prove value across transaction value chains? I know that pilots are very popular with government at the moment, certainly as a result of our Singapore deal. So that may be a suggestion for action that the ICC could take away and consider. But in order to wrap up on those final comments, I didn't know whether the panel felt that the ICC had a role to help drive these pilots within themselves. I think issuing them as part of membership might be a step too far. But again, Chris is assuring us nothing is off the table. But, some activity in pilots, would you encourage the ICC to do that?
Claire, after you.
Well, perhaps I speak selfishly as the global LEI Foundation, but we would certainly welcome that kind of support coming from ICC. I just give you example coming from our mapping initiatives. So it was, for example, support coming from the financial sector that drove the mapping from the BIC to the LEI. So we have now the collaboration with SWIFT. It is seamless and easy to move between the BIC identifier, which is used in routing payments, to that global identifier, the LEI, heavily used within financial markets, financial institutions. And we'd love, for example, if ICC was interested to have mapping relevant more to supply chains, et cetera. We mentioned already in that ICCWO handbook that was released, the GLN. So certainly it would be great to have the support coming from ICC to further those initiatives and make sure that pilots that are very specific, of course, to supply chains, to commerce.
Yeah, and obviously I would, of course, echo that, given the wish that I put out there. I think the ICC, but all commercial membership organisations have the ability to help their members understand the value, which is exactly what this session is about today. So it's fantastic that the ICC are hosting this and delivering this information right now. Helping their members to do that, there is the ability to help with the bootstrapping, and that absolutely pilot level, test level, and so on. I think that is all fundamentally important to bring value to all of the organisation entities. If we focus on the UK right now, I think there is some fantastic opportunities there today. I think the ICC is well placed to start moving towards that, hosting the pilots, hosting the trials. So, yeah, I think that'll be a great position.
Excellent, thank you very much. I am looking to see whether there are any more questions. Let me scroll down. We have a technical question here. Is ISO 80116 an issuer the same as UbiSecure? I'm not too sure I understand that question. Simon, I'm going to bat that one over to you.
I'd say no. So ISO is that spec is that there's a specification for identity. An issuer has to go through a qualification process. Just briefly on that, I can touch briefly on that proxy rather than authoritative issue, if that's helpful. I can tell you as an issuer who is accredited for not every jurisdiction in the world, but many, accessing a good number is insanely difficult to pull that information. What the GLEIF provides with the LEI is the open data ecosystem. Once you have an LEI, that information is accessible and available and can be used in all these processes. If you have to go back to the original source, many of them cannot be accessed. Some we are still having to get by fax today. We are having fax papers sent over to get business identities. As the issuer, that's our problem to sort out. As the person who uses the LEI and benefits from that value, you can't be faced with those sorts of challenges. The LEI ecosystem addresses those challenges and gives a level playing field across all global jurisdictions to access that data.
Excellent, thank you. I can see no more questions appearing in the chat window, and time is slowly creeping up on us. So I think we talked about actions. There's almost certainly, we've done our research, we've proven our point. We feel the use of LEIs is preferable when engaging in trade for a lot of very good reasons, not least know your own customer, access to finance, the open nature of the data, and then also what the LEI just goes on to enable, of which automation and the massive savings from automation are part of that. I mean, they are, whether they're quite as scalable down to SMEs where the automation does, but any automation is good automation as far as I'm concerned. And arguably the bigger prize at that end of the company size is the access to finance. We should be highlighting that certainly with SME members, that if they're having trouble accessing finance, there's an LEI that's a good way to unlock the banks, to get them to unlock their coffers. There's ideas around maybe pilots to demonstrate, encouraging and demonstrating how and what the benefits are, and ICC could potentially have a role within there. There's certainly a role, I think, of just generally championing this. making it aware amongst their members and each other, and companies much doing the same, and also with other business-based organisations as well, that actually, you know, building further and further alliance will create that mass effect, that network effect. I think that what I'm going to do, we're going to leave Chris a few moments at the end, but each of the panel, is there one final thought that you would like to do, short and snappy, to sum up everything? Richard, I'm going to turn to you first.
Yeah, sure. I think the thought I'd probably leave with is the way I always think about the LEIs. It's part of sort of the soft infrastructure of laws, regulations, and standards that kind of set the framework for doing business digitally. So the real benefits of any identifier are only going to come when it's widely used. And in the economist language, I mean, this is probably something that tends towards being a natural monopoly. So, you know, that's why, you know, pick one, go with that one. I think it's a well-established standard grounded in regulation with strong existing reach. So yeah, that's a thought I'd leave you with.
And indeed, Claire, a short, snappy elevator pitch to finish with.
Yeah, certainly. So something we've said at GLEIF since the very initiation of the global LEI system is, well, get an LEI and make it work for you. So I like to put this forward to the corporates that are sitting on the call. We've talked a lot about how this can be used for better due diligence, customer identification, but now we hand over a bit the concept to you to think, well, how could this be used to protect against fraudulent transactions, to ensure that there's, for example, a better confirmation of payee, so payments going to the right direction. So I would almost put a challenge to the audience to say, well, you've received quite a lot of information here today, but we'd love to hear from you as to how would you like to make the LEI work for you.
Indeed, Claire, that's a very valid point. Let's have user-led solutions rather than some kind of top-down provision. Simon, a final elevator pitch, if I may.
A final thing from me, I guess it's actually an ask to all the corporates listening, not dissimilar to Claire's. You today are dealing with other organizations. Go and have a look at your sign up. Go and have a look at your onboarding mechanisms that you have today for your customers, for your businesses. See if you can introduce the LEI as a way of reducing that sign up time and access some of that 95% efficiency saving that's possible by using organization identity to streamline that. Go and do that today. That's a saving you can make straight away, and that will also drive the LEI ecosystem build as well.
Thank you indeed, all the panel. Thank you very much, all three of you, for your conversations. Thank you to the audience, indeed, for their questions, etc. I'm going to hand over to Chris now, but I believe we owe the panel a virtual round of applause before doing so. Thank you very much, all three.
Thank you, Rick, and certainly do. That was really, really illuminating. I think I've learned more in that last hour than I've learned about the whole system in the last year or so. It's answered so many of my questions. I can't see any downsides of this, to be honest. So I'm going to make 2 immediate commitments on this, and my team are probably shaking as I say this. But I'm going to have a look at this as, why can't we just make a discount scheme within the membership of ICC? I can certainly commit that within the UK. I can't commit other countries, of course. My colleagues overseas may scream at me if I do. But you know, why don't we give it a test and see if that makes a difference? You know, I think, you know, the UK as a test bed is very much the kind of space we're at. This is highly relevant to tomorrow, but in terms of piloting without giving it all away, and testing and doing that end-to-end across global value chains, hold that thought, because tomorrow may well be exactly the solution that you're looking for there. And again, I'll make a commitment right here, right now, to say, let's have a look at that, because I think it's well worth doing. So I think, you know, what I'm taking away here is that we just basically need to get the word out, don't we? I mean, there's so many benefits, and it's about adapting those benefits and telling more people. I do think there's a sort of pocket within the finance community who really understand it. They've been using it for a while. It's well established, and we just need to do that. The sort of same exercise was probably what was undertaken in the finance industry some time ago. We need to do that with SMEs and everybody else, don't we? So I think ICC and its network can certainly help with that. So let's get on with that job and take that as a task. But massive thank you to all of you speaking. Thank you so much again to our sponsors for making this happen. This session really sort of wraps up the end of day 2. And tomorrow is the big launch of what I've been trying not to give away all week, or the last 2 weeks actually, is the launch of a new public-private partnership. We're at the stage now where we know or feel we know what the market failure is in the UK about how do we accelerate the digitalization of trade. And what we're planning to do tomorrow is launch a new initiative to solve that market failure and help accelerate the process of digitalization, and importantly, work with our colleagues overseas and act as an exemplar and a model. So we'll have two government ministers. We've been very lucky to secure two government ministers speaking. So we've got the top people here. We've also got a leading regional mayor who's one of our greatest champions in the UK, and regional political leaders, which is interesting too. And we've got our chairman at ICC speaking on behalf of the whole of ICC. And ultimately, what's this initiative going to do? It's going to give us the tools and resources to facilitate connectivity and actually start to test and give us that kind of capability and do research and everything else that we've been talking about for the last 2 days. You know, tomorrow is going to be an answer, a solution to quite a lot of that, as it's been referenced during the conference. So thank you very much, everybody. Hope you can now go away for the rest of your day and put your feet up. There's been a lot of terrific content to kind of absorb and digest. And of course, we'll write up the actions and put those into the action plan that we'll publish next week. So thank you again. Have a nice rest of the day, and hopefully see you all tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock British Standard Time. We kick off. Thank you very much.